This afternoon, I want to bring energy and matter together. And I want to start off from the concept that we are a resonance. And perhaps the resonance that we are is the manifestation of light, slowed down light, creating matter with the other influences. But we have a physical form, and this physical form exists between above and below, between heaven and earth. And when we experience dis-ease, there is a change in the resonance. And particularly, there is a change in the resonance of the affected part, if it is a localized dis-ease, rather than the entire being affected by it. And so I wanted to share with you what I have experienced, if you like, about three of the big players in how this change of resonance becomes physically manifested. And the three big players I would like to speak about are fats and oils, calcium and sodium. Calcium and sodium always move around together. They're joined at the hip. So before talking about these three big players, which demonstrate by their misplacement the imbalance and the dis-ease, I'd just like to go back and talk about the cell. The perfect situation is in the morning on waking. And the nucleus should be positive, inside the cell membrane negative, and the outer cell membrane should be positive. So we have positive, negative, positive. And the differential between the inside of the cell membrane and outside is hugely, hugely important. If we were actually able to measure that, it would be a perfect way of measuring the resonance also in physical form of that cell. And it's a triple layer. The inner and the outer, as we say, holds a charge. The core, the center, does not hold a charge. And the fatty acids and fats are involved in the formation of that. And within that, we have been taught there are these things called calcium gates, which operate like a computer gate, allowing things in and out. And so we can envisage the cell as our microcosm and the manifestation of how much of the macrocosm we can bring in and register within our microcosm. And so we'll look to see in this time of how dis-ease is diminishing. It is a diminishing macrocosm. So the cells, the microcosm, is a diminishing picture of the full potential. As I said, we live between below and above, between heaven and earth. And if we, as such, integrate the different energies, it's kind of life itself. And in this particular situation, we could just look at the electron donation from the earth and the photon light energy from above. So we mentioned the charge of the cell. The perfect situation is this very strong positive charge on the outside of our microcosm, so that it can attract the maximum amount of electron energy, negatively charged subatomic particles, which we think are very much to do with earth substances, and particularly food. And because you have a charge involved, then you have this easy attraction. Then it is thought that the photons become trapped in this. No charge to them, but there is this light which can be measured, this photon energy caught around each cell. And it is that attracts the oxygen. So the perfect cell, in absolutely perfect form, will make its energy, its ATP, 80% from photon energy, transmuted and used, and also as the form of oxygen. So we have 80% oxygen being used and 20% glucose. That's to make ATP in the perfect cell. 80% oxygen, 20% glucose. Now, we have a moving scale in dis-ease manifestation. For those of you who are familiar with the work of Béchamp, you will have heard of microcymas, and you may remember that he is the man who had the completely opposite view to Pasteur. Béchamp said disease is from within, from the soil within. It is what the ancients called the humours. Pasteur said, no, you catch it from outside. Not your responsibility, guys. It comes along and gets you. However, on his deathbed, he did say that Béchamp was correct. Now, he talks about these microcymas, this very, very, very small thing, which influences the state of the cell. It's the same in biodynamic gardening. Steiner knew about this at root formation, influencing how the plant would form. And it is known that there are 16 stages from the perfect, the microcyma, until you get to mycelial. And all of these different stages, you can move backwards and forwards depending upon the soil. And so you can have bacterial manifestation that then can go back to mycelial. You can have viral, you can have mycobacterial, you can have nanobacteria. All of these different forms that the medical profession have put names on can be changed by the humours, the condition in the body. And what is interesting is that each of these stages changes the way the cell operates. So we have the perfect situation, 80% oxygen, 20% glucose, until we get to mycelial, which is 80% glucose and only 20% oxygen. So it's going to be showing us how much the charge of the cell has changed. That cell membrane potential is going to be so weakened that it cannot attract the electrons to it and trap photons to attract oxygen. So there is this sequence of events, of this harmony of living in resonance between heaven and earth. It's all about the energy. So how does this manifest? You know, what is going on here? We start to change the way that the cell operates. And I want to preface this by the way we have been taught, because I personally believe most of what we've been taught is probably wrong. So we are taught, or were taught, that sodium and calcium move into the cell through these gates during the daytime under the sun influence. And it will push out its opposite. So calcium will push out magnesium, sodium will push out potassium. And at night, the process is reversed because the charge of the planet changes on which we live. And we have a difference in terms of availability of photon energy. And so then we are taught that the sodium and calcium will leave and the potassium and magnesium come back in. Well, what we now are aware of, and probably always have been aware of from ancient times, but it being changed, and certainly in the world of homeopathy, I've always been aware of it, and within the work of Steiner, there are not enough of these gates for this exchange to be physical. The majority of this must be by transmutation. So what are we saying here? We are saying that when the energy changes, the form, the manifestation changes. Because you can no longer be talking about sodium and calcium going in and coming out if there isn't enough facility in the physical way for this to happen. And we know that the amount of oxygen and photons present has an enormous influence on transmutation. In fact, is the energy that is required for this to take place. So if we hold that as that going from 80% oxygen to 20% oxygen, how do we see a physical form of dis-ease? And we can think of a cyst or tumor or something like that. If we become dehydrated, the body will always look after us, and it will start to produce cholesterol to coat the cell membrane. You can see pictures of this quite rod-like structure of the cholesterol interwoven in this triple cell membrane. And as soon as that happens, it's going to influence this exchange of this day-night exchange of the sodium, calcium, and the potassium and magnesium. It's going to be interrupted. And so we are going to have a change of the charge of that cell. And what you find is that sodium and calcium starts to be left inside the cell. And when we're thinking of calcium, we're always thinking of a more hardened structure. So the cell starts to manifest this hardness, which creates a drop in the resonance of that part of the body. So resonance and where calcium and sodium are placed, and resonance, they're so dependent upon each other. So as soon as we are dehydrated, and we can talk about reasons, and the cell goes on to this defense, then the first thing that will happen is a hardening, the hardening and the lowering of the resonance of that part of the body, which means there are fewer electrons and fewer photons available to that cell. So that cell is starting to drop away from the bigger information picture. It's taking itself gradually out of the perfect rhythm and resonance to this more hardened, more cut-off situation. So, what creates dehydration? In the East, they know that the water element holds fear and anxiety. The winter is the time of the water element, the kidneys and the bladder being the organs involved. So any kind of stress on a person will have a physical manifestation. we cannot operate just looking at the physical or looking at the energetic part of life. You have to see how the two interact, so the energy of stress felt by the body will be registered on the water element, the water component, as dehydration. And in the East, they know that if this has been registered for 2 years, the body will go on to what we call dehydration alert. And at that point is when the cholesterol is used to protect the cell from dehydrating to death. But if you wish to move the story on, you cannot leave that dehydration alert situation there, because already that cell is compromised. Already it's moved out of communication. Already it started a slightly hardening situation. And so we need very much to give the body the reassurance that it is not dehydrated, so that the brain can return to its 80% water and the body to 70% water. And this is done via the message coming from the colon. Very, very important, because when we're looking at deep dis-ease, we are looking at really deep dehydration, a big drop in resonance of the area and a hardening, this calcium deposition and this cholesterol production. So that very much needs to be switched off. So let's go and look at the 3 big players that I mentioned. Fats and oils, calcium and sodium. Over the last maybe 2 years, it has become very, very obvious to me that most people cannot break down fats and oils. And the liver is compromised. And the liver is the organ that controls hydration. The kidneys are the filter. So the liver cannot afford to be compromised by fats and oils that it can't deal with. And the most difficult fats and oils are heated fats and oils. I mean, they've even, it was in a broadcast where they're saying they think one of the main contributions to the best health in the nation of the Japanese is that they very, very rarely heat fats and oils. I mean, they eat their fish raw, for example. And so I think it would be very, very important for people to look at the amount of fat and oil, particularly heated fats. I mean, if you look at the really unhealthy end of the spectrum, all the biscuits, the cake, dare I mention pasties, pastry, all of those things. But also to look at what percentage of calories are being taken in the form of fats and oils. I mean, the number of people I know who consider themselves to be eating very healthily, who'll eat a whole bag of nuts in a day. These are a concentrated food. You know, they are the seeds for the next season. And seeds likewise, they're in dormant form. So when you start looking, you see that people are taking in a huge amount of their calorific value in the way of fats and oils, and particularly the heated fats and oils. And although we know that the fats that are safer to heat are the saturated fats, the ones with no double carbon bonds, I would like to suggest today to you that you should avoid as much as possible in your diet heating fats and oils, because otherwise you're going to overtax your liver, your organ of hydration. And it's only when your hydration is operating well, that your lymph can operate and your body can cleanse, your immune system can be strong. So if we overload the fats and oils, the liver cannot break it down, and it then goes through the lacteals in the villi in the small intestine straight into the lymph. So often the first sort of illness that we see in our young children, sore throats, ear infections, where there is sluggish lymph drainage to those areas. So there is some congestion and stagnation that is taking place in the lymph. The lymph then drips into the blood with each heartbeat, and the left side carries the lymph from the whole body, including the left ear, apart from that part of the head. The right is the drip in of the lymph from the head, less the left ear. So it's easy to see why this side usually undergoes the largest problem of stagnation of lymph. So here we have this lymph which is not flowing in the way that it should, draining into the blood. And the effect upon the blood is to have clumping of red blood cells, which starts to affect the oxygenation. And equally, we have lining of the blood vessels and affecting the glucose escape from the blood into the cell to help make the ATP. So it's very, very easy to see why there is so much heart disease when you have this process going on, starting with the dehydration, overtaxing the liver, the organ of anger and planning and structure, so that it's going straight into the lymph, into the blood, and affecting just the whole movement. So the entire being of the person is stagnating and the resonance of the energy is lowering. So it's kind of the beginning of solidifying. And at that stage is when we have inflammation, because body doesn't know how to work against us. So inflammation, heat, organisms there, bacteria, viruses, whatever label we wish to put on, to resolve that situation of stagnation and toxicity in that area. But if we carry on, pushing on, increasing this situation, the body ceases to be able to do this inflammation, this localized inflammation, and again that starts to go out of communication. So I really would encourage you to look at your fats and oils. I mean, if you go out and just stand looking, go look at what they sell in a health food shop window if they're cooking things. I mean, you just look at the bag of the amount of oil that oozes out of most of these things. So it's a huge percentage of intake. And also remember that carbohydrates, fats and protein exist together in almost every food. I mean, if I say to you there is 9% protein in a sweet potato, we have got used to putting these things into separate categories. Then, if we look at the other big players, the sodium and calcium, and really I would like to concentrate on the calcium, just knowing the sodium travels with it, because it's very easy for us to understand this hardening, this heaviness, this drop in resonance, where this is dropped out of solution or placed neatly within the cell. The huge, huge thing that has been forgotten is that for healthy bones, it is not calcium but silica that we need. It is so important. And if we start looking at transmutation and we start looking again at Steiner's work, it is the silica we need to keep everything in place. It is the grit and determination in homeopathy, the oat straw. It's the structure. And apparently, I was told yesterday by an astrologer, we now have, after the eclipse that we've just had, which was to put everything from the past down. It is no longer relevant. And with Saturn sitting in Scorpio, we have restructuring. Saturn is about structure, and silica belongs in there. So I think we need to take a long, hard look at the importance of silica for keeping everything in the right place. Very interesting that silica did not get through the positive list for supplements. So we have to look elsewhere. You can go and buy your magnesium, but you cannot go and buy silica as a supplement. But it is absolutely crucially important for the placement of all these things. So we've talked about hardening in terms of calcium deposition, and we know as homeopaths that silica also ejects what we don't want. Anything alien is ejected, pushed out by silica. So it is this really important part for us to understand. When you think of the sort of prescribing that goes on for osteoporosis, it's complete insanity. The sort of things that are created, because we do not want this calcium dropping out of solution or being placed and hardening. We don't want people to lower their resonance. We want people to be elevated in touch and much lighter in that way. The sources of silica, one of the richest sources, you look at the very big grasses. So if you look at sugarcane, for example, when they crush sugarcane, it's actually very, very rich in silica. Bamboo, barley grass, nettles, horsetail, they all have a structure which is rich in silica. So we can make teas in order to augment the diet, which is very, very important again, to stop this hardening, to push it back to where it belongs for the formation. So we really need to take a long, hard look at how, we've been led to believe about bone formation and calcium. But we do know that the most difficult things to change are the things with the most calcium within them. So it's that lovely English word, incalcitrant. So much calcium within, it's resistant. So whilst we're concentrating on calcium in the wrong place and a misunderstanding about calcium, think about the water you drink. The amount of inorganic calcium that is likely to be coming through. And when you think of people who live for such a long time, like the Hunzas, their water is charged in a very different way and isn't seeping up through layers of chalk. So I think it's very, very important that you look at the water you're drinking, that you're not ladening your body with all of this inorganic calcium, and to pay particular attention to making sure that your diet is very, very rich in silica. When we're talking about the humours, the soil, the condition in the body, we are talking about the body fluids. So to have stagnation in the lymph and in the blood is not something we wish to have. So we've talked about fats and oils there. But the very largely deciding influence is the pH of the body. We are all alkaline beings, but all of the metabolic processes produce acidity. And so we have to work quite hard to remain alkaline. And it's by morning, when we were talking about the perfect functioning of the cell, that we should be able to test alkaline. Because we have to maintain alkaline blood, 7.34, otherwise we would die. And the body knows not to do that. So it will maintain alkaline blood at the cost of the rest of the body. So blood stays alkaline, joints start to change, things start to ache, muscles are not so strong, blood sugar goes all over the place, the mind is not so clear. And so a very rough and ready comparative way to look at it is in the morning, maybe once a week, swallow hard on waking to clear the saliva from your tongue, let it reaccumulate, spit it into a very clean spoon and test with a pH stick or paper to see whether you are 7 or slightly above. It's a good guideline in changing and adapting your diet. But of course, one of the biggest influences is the fats and oils, because if you're challenging the liver so that it can't regulate hydration, you will stay dehydrated and the body won't cleanse properly. And so this is why we have so many people showing allergies. It isn't possible to have an allergic response unless you are very dehydrated, because we know from the East that it's the colon that registers the hydration, whether we are or not. And in the colon, we have mast cells, and these produce the histamine in response to the level of hydration. And the more dehydrated, more and more mast cells are produced, to the point where occasionally you'll meet people where the skin is so sensitive with the mast cells that they can't go out in the sunlight. And so that liver function controlling hydration is so, so important to look at there. So, from the nutritional point of view, there is so much controversy and so many ways that are offered. But I think there's one thing I'm very, very happy and would always say, is that vegetables are our best friend. I mean, the way they're grown, if you grow them yourself, if you grow them biodynamically, so that you're growing them within the energies and the rhythms, are the best. But why am I saying they're the best? The reason is because we want to minimize stress to us. And so if we match the energy to us, there will be less friction. So if people have a chicken which they feed, they see every day, they have this contact and communication with the chicken, the egg that that chicken lays is going to have a harmony with the person who eats it, as opposed to the egg from Tesco's. It's this connection and similarity of energy. And the same, goes in terms of macrobiotics, eating within your area, and the closer to you, the more likely it is to be like your energy. And in fact, the blessing of food does not have anything really to do with the word religion. You are placing your palms, which has a great emission of your energy, over the food to resonate with the food, with the fluids in the food, so that you are reducing the surface tension in the water in the food, which makes it much more like you. And when you bless water, you reduce the surface tension, and the oxygen, the hydrogen peroxide that is measured, is higher. So it's this integrating, this understanding of integrating our energy with what we put in ourselves. This is how homeopathy works. You are placing the energy of the imbalance in resonance to shift it. So the more hydrated a person, the more responsive they are to the remedies, because the resonance is felt on the water. So if we're saying we are a resonance and we wish to lift the resonance, and that is heard on water, felt on water, because it's the only medium that will hold the accurate picture. You can see how vitally important this aspect of hydration is. And when you think of oil and water, how damaging having too much oil, etc., can be. And so people will be saying, yes, I know, Barbara, but omega-3 is terribly important and all the rest of it. Yes, it is. But can you use it? And so I have worked with people where you clear that picture so the liver is clear. So you stop using all the fats and oils and what is an overriding to get the body to use it. When you're looking at things like MS, where the DHA is terribly important, then if you give it, the body can use it, rather than overwhelming it with quantities that it can't break down. The body is very resourceful, and it doesn't need high quantities of anything, because we know transmutation takes place, and we know that can it use it? So it seems to me that the alternative world is full of using masses of all sorts of things, because the intellect is saying, this is good for this is good for this is good. This is the intellect speaking. And if you put it into your body, the resonance of that is being registered in the body, creating a demand, so that resonance will create a stress on demand. So if someone is in deep dis-ease and there is so much hardening and dropping of the resonance, this is where gently it needs to be opened and lifted, the resonance and the hydration growing and improved. And as this happens, so the ability to release cell memory and patterning and emotion can take place. So really, nutrition is about enabling us to raise our resonance, and it's fitting us to use these energies from above and below, and where disease is dropping out from that. I actually don't agree at all with the previous speaker about light, because they have photographed the shedding of biophotons from the cells. So not only can the body trap and store light, it can produce light. And interestingly, if two people are in complete harmony and synchronicity, like in a healing situation, the shedding of the biophotons are extremely high. It would be wonderful to be able to photograph Matthew in a healing session. So, we actually communicate via light. That is the empathy, that ability that we carry. It's a resonance, you can feel it. You talk about people lighting up, you talk about people being enlightened. It's nothing to do with religion. And we're talking about people who are more in touch when the resonance is raised. There's all this talk about the light body in a very sort of way that doesn't have a physical structure maybe. But we do have a light body. We do produce biophotons and we do store light. And the healthier the cell, the more light there is around it, and the bigger the differential of the cell membrane from inside to out. And they have actually been able to record with deep disease how similar the inner and outer is, which means that the 4 electrolytes, the sodium, potassium, calcium and magnesium, are really in the wrong place. That exchange and transmutation is not taking place. The structure, the order has been lost in that way. Another area of passion for me is what I call old-fashioned nursing techniques. Because if we ask the body to change, to be better, to be well, we should look in the way that we would if we're going to do an experiment in a laboratory. You know, is the test tube hydrated? What is the pH? What is the temperature? And what is the light availability, which of course knocks on to oxygen availability. And it's absolutely no different in our body. Those are the humours, that's the background situation which will influence how the cells operate, how in touch, in communication are the cells with each other, because of their communication via light, that if you have them hardening and dropping out of resonance, if you have the full spectrum of light hitting the ideal cell, the full spectrum of light will move through and be communicated to all cells adjacent. But if this cell is in a lowered resonance or dis-ease state, the light will be refracted and only part of the spectrum will be passed on. So you have this diminution of information via light through the colours. And so I'm very fond of techniques that will show and give to the body the full spectrum of light. And I'm particularly fond of a lot of Edgar Cayce's work, which some of you may be familiar with. Castor oil packing. The castor oil is also known as the Palma Christi, and it carries the full spectrum of light. It's a saturated fat, no double carbon bonds, and of course grows in very warm climates. And so his castor oil packing is where you place castor oil over the liver for an hour, and you put a hot water bottle over it to really help regenerate the liver function. But of course, it's all to do with the resonance of its full spectrum of light being given to that major organ that looks after hydration, to create the flow, to the cleansing, and that sort of emptiness, if you like, so that you can have this light raised resonance and vibration rather than lowering it. And also things like Epsom salt baths, where you're using magnesium in the sulfate form, because we find as the body moves into distress, into dis-ease, you often find that the person can no longer convert sulfur to sulfate. And it is the sulfate form which enables detoxing from the cells. And so the person soaks in an Epsom salt bath. And it is particularly effective and soothing for children with autism, where you have the effect of that. And of course the magnesium is also very important in terms of calcium placement, and is actually known as the natural tranquilizer, the magnesium in the body. And so in natural nutrition, We use many different techniques so that we can help the body not feel overstressed to create change, because creating change is hard work. And so when a regime, shall we say, is changed, a lifestyle, a way of being is changed, and things like new moons and eclipses and equinoxes and solstices, there is a discharge of unwanted material from the cells in the tissue of everyone into the lymph, into the blood, taken to the liver to be filtered and discharged from the body, or breathed out through the lungs, or discharged through the skin. So we use a lot of techniques that support all of these routes of elimination. And so that you're not creating more stress for the body, you're actually reducing it so that it will know how to hydrate. Otherwise, if you're just asking it to do more and more and giving it more and more, on a level that it really doesn't understand, because it really only understands resonance on the water component of the body. Again, the essence of how the energy therapies, the homeopathy, the acupuncture are actually working. That's the language it understands. It is actually the language that we understand and we are constantly exchanging, but really is never talked about in our society.
Okay, anybody else got a question? Dave?
Yeah, I just want to know what your thoughts are on urine therapy. On urine therapy.
Urine therapy.
Oh, I love it. It's free, you know?
I don't understand urine therapy, I must say. I'm a bit confused because, you know, as a sort of doctorish sort of person, you imagine that the kidneys are sort of excreting toxins that we don't need, and so therefore why would you then put them back in again, is the obvious question.
Well, I think most doctors, Steve, would admit that it's an overflow from lymph. It is not the release of toxicity.
Okay.
And as a homeopath, of course, one is used to having a similar resonance. That's homeopathy. Urine therapy is isopathy. It is your identical resonance. So you are giving to yourself your own resonance. I mean, I really have experienced over my many years of practicing extraordinary things with urine therapy and castoral packing. I'd pick those two things out as being the only way that one can explain them is looking at resonance and energy rather than the material world.
I've also had experience with, I did a 30-day urine fast as well.
Yes, absolutely. And urine enemas, amazing.
Urine pack to heal things.
Absolutely, where lymph has been impaired or lymph nodes removed and urine packing the stuff that comes out through the skin. And, you know, because we know in Eastern medicine the connection between colon and lungs, and urine enema for people with lung issues absolutely blow away.
What influence do you think sugar or glucose has on the situation as a major player? You mentioned calcium.
Yes.
Sodium, oils,
yes.
Silica, but not sugar, basically.
Well, I mean, sugar's I mean, beyond mentioning almost, isn't it, really?
Well, mention a little bit about sugar. Go on.
Well, of course, when we're talking about these 16 stages of change from the microzyma and going through, the mycelial is, of course, the fungal, when the cell is almost anaerobic. And what we need to do is clear the lymph and clear out those blood vessels so that it's not contained within there. It can be utilized. Been a lot of research looked at with type 2 diabetes in that way, where it's absolutely not getting out. So the inclination would then be that the person craves more and more sweet things. Yeah, so, you know, if you look at the diet, if you look at the sugars and the fats in the modern diet, it's pretty scary. Yeah.
Excellent. Everybody please put your hands together and